My name is Kate Morris, and I am the gifted instructional coach for Central Consolidated School District, but also the CES TAP consultant for gifted. So we have a lot of information that we're going to go over today. If you have not, if you haven't been paying attention, there have been a lot of changes to gifted and the gifted technical assistance manual in the last year. And so it's really super important that we are starting to utilize the state. So it's super important for us to start using the new gifted IEP. So I don't know how many of you guys are part of Power School special programs districts, but the long-awaited time of these special programs, new gifted IEP from the New Mexico Gifted TAM is released. Now, in my district, I didn't have power to go in and find it. I had to have the special ed people pull it up and give me access to it. But if you have Power School special programs in New Mexico, you should have it. Today, we're going to be utilizing a Google Doc version that my school district has been using since last February. But I went in and checked the Power School Special Programs version, and it is almost exactly the same, just a little bit of different formatting. So all of the different pieces that we talk about today will fit within that new gifted IEP. So today we will be going over the new gifted IEP process for the state of New Mexico. We'll be reviewing the New Mexico Gifted TAM from 2023, the new IEP document, the new eligibility determination document that my district has adopted from assistance from the TAM, and the why. Why do we do IEPs? Then we'll be talking about planning. It's super important for people that have small to large caseloads, the IEP due dates, compliance, year-long planning, and having the information you need to write the IEP. And then finally, the main portion of our discussion today will be actually looking at gifted IEPs for elementary and secondary, and seeing how we look at the present levels, writing goals, accommodation, schedule of services, and kind of the new ways that I've been experimenting with in my school district, and have been working with Christopher Vion from NM PED on the different ways that we can kind of update and make sure that we are utilizing this document to its fullest ability. So Selena is going to put into the chat. This is a Google Doc that I started last year. I've been updating it slowly, but it's kind of an arsenal of all of the different IEP resources that I've created out of the New Mexico Gifted TAM from 2023. So we have an invitation for a gifted IEP, an original IEP form, secondary level IEP, and then an update template. Then I have some exemplars of different IEPs, and then there's some manuals and resources and some other professional development on there as well. Please feel free to utilize it, share it. The documents that are made are what our district is using currently. Just as a preface, the reason why I'm not going into special programs and using that new IEP is our school district elected to use a company out of Texas called Project GT. I believe that the state level gave a presentation and demo last year, but we decided to go with them, and they are currently building and making all of our documents in that program. And so we will be using that for gifted IEPs rather than Power School special programs. So that's kind of why I haven't gone all feed in for the PSSP one. All right. So, before we get into the discussion, I kind of like to see what my audience is this morning. So if you could just quickly put into the chat your name, where you're, what school you're at, and what role you play. And while y'all are doing that, I am from, I grew up in Washington, D.C., went to LSU and ASU for my master's in gifted education. And I've been teaching gifted education for 10 years in the state of New Mexico. And super passionate about gifted ed and love that I'm able to help and assist you guys. Awesome. We seem like we have lots of different roles. So let's dive into the new gifted IEP process. You guys are probably tired of me talking about the gifted technical assistance manual, but if you have not read this 111-page document, do so. It will give you everything you need for your district. And that is where all of the information for this for the documents that I'm sharing with you today have come from. So we in our district had a lot of struggles where there hadn't been identification of gifted students for 6 years. So it left us top heavy in CCSD. So we had all of our gifted students at the middle school and high school level and 0 at the elementary school level. I'm very happy to say we have increased our elementary to, I believe, 45 across the district. We tested 500 students through universal testing and referral testing last spring. I literally tested up until the last day of school. And so one of the disadvantages was they were no longer, I had to wait through the summer before we could really start the portfolio and identification process. So this last week was the first day that we were actually able to have our first school gifted team meeting. Now, in the technical assistance manual, we no longer have SAT for gifted. No more SAT for gifted. That does not mean SAT has gone away, but for gifted it is no longer. And so when you're determining eligibility for gifted services, you're supposed to meet with a school gifted team, which is basically an IEP team that is deciding yay or nay on gifted identification. So being that I've experienced this in the last couple of weeks, the most time-consuming part was actually putting together the eligibility determination forms, but having it on Google Docs actually really helped. What happened was my gifted teachers all had a shared drive with me where we made folders for each one of the students, and then they would pop in whatever evidence they had, whether it was test scores, whether it was drawings, whether it was playbills from plays they've been acting in, brownie or Girl Scout awards, stuff like that. And so it really made it easy for me to write the eligibility determination form. And then we scheduled these SGT decision days, school gifted team decision days. So at one of the schools that we had last week, we had 18 gifted nominations. It took us an hour to go through looking at all the evidence with the school gifted team, and they voted in the 4 different ways you can vote. And we'll go over that here in a second. But very simple, very painless. Compared to other special ed and gifted stuff, I think everybody was pleasantly surprised how easy it was. So at this point, after they have been nominated for either their gifted IEP or put into the talent pool, they are all of the gifted teachers at the school site are now good to go with starting the IEPs. So we've done that at 2 schools. I do another school tomorrow, and we'll be finished by the end of next week for our district. And then all of our gifted IEPs are good to go. And for those who do not qualify or are going to the talent pool, they will receive a letter. So one of the things that I've been going over with each one of the school gifted teams is the new 6 areas of giftedness, because this changed in the 2023 gifted TAM. So we have general intellectual ability, creative and divergent thinking, problem solving and critical thinking. And if you notice, the cut score is 95th percentile. Now I want to remind you, this has been interpreted as a soft 95th percentile. So what does that mean? Say, for instance, you have a kid that is in the 94th percentile for mathematics on the COGAT. In the old system, that wouldn't have qualified for gifted services. If I'm sitting there with a 94th percentile, I'm going to work with the gifted teacher to get some examples for portfolio, but also look at his MSSA scores, see if those are advanced, because that is a qualifying feature in the New Mexico gifted TAM. Also, if he's an ELL student, you can look at access scores. I had a very geeky moment a couple weeks ago, gifted geekiness, where I actually got to identify 2 kids with their access scores, put them over the top. So I was like super excited. One of them had 2.5 years of growth in 1 year, or acquisition in 1 year. So yeah, so lots and lots of stuff. So it's a lot more open than it had been in the past. The next 3 areas are specific aptitude and achievement. And this does not just include English and English language arts and mathematics. It's actually any subject area that's listed in the NMAC, the New Mexico Administrative Code. So career and technical, science, social studies, Spanish language, students can be identified and gifted for this. They have to show exceptional or potential talent at an advanced level. Then we also have the 2 new additions, which is artistic ability and leadership. This is one of the questions that we've had the most on because it's brand spanking new. We are not the first state to add these. We have Kentucky and Indiana, and there's several other states across the United States that has artistic ability and leadership. But this is new for us and for our state. So I am proud to say that I have identified, I believe, 4 students, 2 for artistic ability and 2 for leadership. One of them actually transferred to another school district. When the gifted teacher got the IEP, she kind of, I heard from the coordinator, she was kind of like, what is this? I don't think this is a thing. And the gifted coordinator was like, yes, there's lots of changes. So there's lots of different things that are kind of subjective in this, but we're kind of working it out, building the plane as we go. So I will give you guys some examples of how you would have this in a portfolio type of situation in your gifted eligibility. So the school gifted team, this is replacing the need for a special educational diagnostician. This is replacing the need for just having one person being a gifted evaluator in the district. This is allowing for the actual IEP team or the school gifted team to vote on whether students need gifted services or not. So the student assistance team was deficit-based, and so that's why we're no longer using it for gifted. The newly created school gifted team will use research-based best practices and views gifted as a strength-based model when identifying the gifted students. So this team can be needs to be comprised of school and staff and relevant members like gifted teachers, district diagnosticians, gifted evaluators, counselors, school leaders, general ed teachers, ancillary staff, community members, such as like in our district, one of the things I'm looking for in our artistry are our Indigenous youth that are extremely talented in the art of silversmithing and basketry and weaving. And so we might bring in an area expert to be part of that gifted team if we were nominating a kid in one of those specialized areas. And then also a fine arts teacher, because they can have a lot of insight on creativity and, you know, kind of that creative side of a student. So this is the gifted evaluation form. I actually had a lot of people from the last presentation really were interested in this. So basically, when I was looking through the technical assistance manual last year, I gave Chris Vion a call and I was like, hey, what do we do for evaluation? And he goes, well, you have the gifted team. And I was like, well, is there an actual form? And there was sort of a form in the technical assistance manual. And so what I did was I kind of comprised that document plus an eligibility determination form from special education and kind of made a hybrid. And so this is what our school district is currently using. Now, our district uses a portfolio system, and we're actually going to be looking into the Gadsden case study as an alternative protocol, and I can do a training on that, on what the difference between that and the other alternative protocols are. But we're using a portfolio system, but also kind of combining it with TAPAS, which is the talent and potential assessment system. And so those are both identified alternative protocols. You can always use regular old-fashioned gifted testing as well. But one of the things that you want to make sure in your school district is that your gifted numbers are matching your population numbers. So say, for instance, like in our district is, I believe, 93% Native American. I want to make sure as the gifted coordinator that 93% of my gifted population is also Native American, so it is equitable. And so if those numbers are not matching for you, an alternative protocol might be the best practice. So, but I will say that with the openness of the gifted TAM and being able to put multiple pieces of evidence towards identification, it's opening up a lot of doors for kids that might have been cut out before. So this is the evaluation. So this is what I present to the school gifted team. So we have just the basic information, the way that the student was referred into the system. So it might be the third grade universal sweep. It might be an educational diagnostician. It might be a teacher review. It might be a talent pool. It might be a school psychologist. But it just lets you know how they got to this point. Their parents' information, and then the type of referral. And so what I've been finding is, especially with the recommendations with the older students that are like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I'm finding myself marking the recommendation. Then I go look up their MSSA scores, which is a state assessment. And a lot of times I'm ending up putting both because they have scored advanced in those areas, which is really nice because that's 2 really good pieces of evidence. So I put that. We're going to be actually in our school district with the 3rd grade talent pool. We're going to be using fully the TAPAS system, but we're just experimenting a little bit. So then we went through and go through what we're looking for. So most of the students, it's going to be those 4 areas of giftedness: GIA, creative and divergent thinking, problem solving or critical thinking, and specific aptitude or achievement. I have not expanded my repertoire into science and social studies. Those will probably be my first. But I was getting questions about physical education. I have not done this yet, but it is possible with the system. So if you need any advice or consultation on that, just let me know. Totally willing to work with you and bounce ideas of how we collect that evidence. Then this example was a universal screener. So there wasn't a lot of information to evaluate on artistic ability or leadership. But especially with the referral students, there might be more chance of them being evaluated for that. Also, I don't know how many of you guys use the cognitive abilities test, the COGAT, as one of your tests. But I actually found a student last year that is extremely talented in art by her using the draw screen on the COGAT. I was monitoring them during their testing, and this kid, third grader, was drawing and shading a human figure on the computer on this like very basic draw screen. And so we went further into her identification, and we were able to identify her as artistic ability. Oh, I was going to share a story on leadership ability. The other day, I had a principal that was bragging on one of the students that was one of the Navajo pageant winners for their school. And this little girl, she's in 6th grade, she did a 30-minute presentation in an auditorium on the dyeing of wool, and did it in front of an audience of over 100 people. And they had videos and they had pictures, and they were talking about all the things that she does. And I said to the principal, send me all of that stuff, because we can use that in her portfolio and look at her for leadership. So sometimes you find these little golden nuggets and bounce on them, because people don't realize that we can start using this stuff as part of their portfolio and identification. All right, so this is an example of a student that took the universal screener, and then we developed a body of evidence. This student was in the top 20% of her local normed school for the COGAT screener. And then she moved on to the full testing. She ended up scoring 98th percentile in verbal, 98th percentile in nonverbal, 100th percentile in verbal, nonverbal composite, and then 98th percentile in verbal, quantitative, nonverbal composite. So she met all of the qualifications for this by the state requirement, a 95th percentile or higher. Now, you'd think that we would be good to go. We want to have a couple more pieces of evidence to back this up. So we looked at her interim assessment because she was a 3rd grader, and she was on target. And then she also had the year before been part of the gifted enrichment class, which is a pull-out MLSS Tier 3 layered intervention. And so we talked about her being part of that class, doing exceptionally well in her talents and her different areas, and her high ability interactions with her intellectual peers. We also put an observation in there, talking about some of her creative projects. And then also we used the scales for identifying gifted, the SIGS 2 and the HOPE scale as surveys for her identification with her teachers. Then in part 4, we have the evaluator recommendations. I put the criteria for NM PED gifted qualification from the state NMAC in here. And then what our district is doing is, based on the information, we're doing a recommendation by the school gifted team. So this kid was recommended for identification in general intellectual ability, specific aptitude and achievement in English and language arts and mathematics, and creative and divergent thinking. If that student had not had enough information, or let's say those scores were in the 92nd, 93rd percentile, and we felt at this time wasn't gifted, but still would benefit from those tier 3 interventions, we could recommend placement in the talent pool with MLSS advanced supports. In our school district, this is more so for the elementary, but we are also having a few talent pool students at the high school level as well. We also have a choice of does not qualify, the D and Q. And then a lot of times in our first meeting, if we recommended them to be placed in the talent pool, we were also going to add additional information and evidence over the next few months. And we rescheduled meetings to review that information in January of this next year. So after that recommendation was made, then we went around and discussed as the school gifted team whether they agreed or disagreed with the decision. It was just like an IEP team. The decision was made by the team. So that is kind of what the gifted eligibility determination process is looking like in my district. I know it probably is going to look different in everybody's district, but we kind of were building things from scratch and didn't know exactly what we were doing while we were flying the plane. But this is really working. I must say that the principals and the leaders of the school have been very happy with the meetings because they're very short, sweet, and concise. And then the gifted teachers are, after they have this clearance, then they go and start the IEPs. All right. Pretty straightforward. Definitely it's kind of, creating something new. But Trevor, that's a great question. Are the parents involved in the process prior to the IEP? The answer to that is no. Because we're talking about multiple different students at these school gifted team meetings. So the other day when I had on Friday, we had 17 gifted nominees. Their teachers might not necessarily be their regular ed teacher. We just had a regular ed teacher, a fine arts teacher, an administrator, a gifted teacher, and myself. And we, as the school gifted team, decided. After that, that's when the parents will get involved with the individual education process. I actually had a parent in a parent meeting a couple of weeks ago ask if she could be involved with the school gifted team. And I explained to her, really the only outside people we're bringing in are those area experts, because FERPA and confidentiality is something we do need to be concerned with. So no, they are not part of the eligibility determination process. They will then have an initial IEP where they will either decide whether to or whether not to have their student in gifted services. So that's when the parent input comes in. All right, so we're going to be talking about documentation and best practices for IEP prep. Now, if you missed my presentation at the beginning of the year, which was the student or the gifted teacher toolkit to kind of prep you, we do have that recording up on the CES website. And that would be a great one to go look at for progress monitoring and case management. I decided to take a few of those parts out so that we could spend more time on the IEP itself. And so this is more best practices of prepping for that IEP, some different organizational things that we can do as gifted case managers. So tips for preparing for IEPs: don't overestimate the power of scheduling. Sometimes I schedule 2 or 3 months out so that I have them on the calendar. I have my teachers ready. I have my students ready. I have my meeting place ready. And then, you know, sometimes you have a IEP thrown in there because a parent requested it, and that's fine. But making sure that you're organized in your schedule is super important. Also, making sure that you're creating a consistent system of monitoring progress towards your IEP goals for your gifted students takes a lot of unnecessary investigation and time away from the GIEP writing process. If you already have that information, you're good to go. And you can just start writing your IEP. Also, a very key thing is preparation of the general education teacher. This is going to sound horrible, but I've had the experience where you pull a gen ed teacher in and it's the first 9 weeks through and they literally have nothing to say about the student in front of the parent. And they say, well, they're very quiet. They don't say much in class. I always try to prepare my general education teachers to make sure that they realize they need to have some evidence in that IEP meeting to share. The good, the bad, the ugly. And then also protect your prep time. I know that I had struggles when I was a case manager of actually sitting down and writing the IEP while I was in the school building during the school day. Too many distractions, bells, you know, people knocking on my classroom door, classes, everything that you can imagine. But you've got to protect that prep time. And that case management time is that time for you to work on that IEP. And so I now kind of plug in and focus, listening to music. And then sometimes I would just do them at night as well because I had more focus time with it. It all depends on how you work and how you do it. But make sure that you're protecting that prep time at school for you to prepare your IEPs. Super important is that due date. Yearly IEP planning is important to make sure that you know what's coming up. This is an example of our steps for scheduling a GIEP in my district. We call and make an appointment with a parent at least 10 days in advance. We make the GIEP invitation and send it home. Sometimes we send it home with the kids. Sometimes we send it home with the district liaison. And then we have a process for scheduling it on our calendars and making sure that we're having the case manager, the school, the LEA are all on the same page and they are ready for that Google Meet or in-person meeting. And usually I have a Google Meet just in case someone has to go on virtually. But remember that due date is especially important for compliance, and you do not want to go over that due date. So I always think about it like a birthday. You don't want to miss somebody's birthday, so you don't want to miss an IEP date. One of the things that I get asked a lot of questions about when I'm doing in-person training for gifted IEPs, whether it's SPED or gifted, you get questions from parents about it. Sometimes you get questions from regular education teachers, especially for gifted IEPs, is why? Why do we do this? Why do we have all of this time and effort put into this document? And when I first started being a case manager in 2015, I never really seen an IEP. I guess I did some in Louisiana. I don't really remember as a first-year teacher being part of any of those IEP teams. But it was a little bit overwhelming, and especially at that point in time because we were using the secondary IEP, the SPED IEP for the gifted IEP. But when you really break it down for your students, this is their chance to have a plan that is their individual plan. This is where they can express themselves and set out their goals, set out what they want to do with their life, set out how they want to work with their regular education teachers and possibly what they need more of from those regular education teachers. And so we are very lucky in the state of New Mexico because gifted education services are protected by the special education laws from 1978. So it is very lucky that we are able to have that protection, because there's some states that do not. We also have to think about, this is how funding is tied to the gifted area. Next year, and we're going to have more information on this after the legislation session and the budget meetings in March and April of next year, but 2025-26 school year, every school district has to start reporting how they are spending their gifted funds on gifted students. It has never been tracked before. And there was a lot of pushback on that. But it will be interesting to see where that money is going and being spent for our gifted students. So that expenditure, that partial funding that we get is driven by the IEP. So that's one other really important reason for it. The other thing that I've been working on with my gifted teachers is there was kind of an old-fashioned idea, and Susan, you'll know this term, Ms. Boyles. There was a long time in New Mexico gifted where you only service them 15 minutes and 15 minutes only. You weren't able to do anything else. It didn't matter if you spent 4 hours a day with them. You could only put 15 minutes down. So one of the things that I am encouraging my teachers to do in my district is really starting to look at how much time we are spending with these individual students and actually putting it on their IEPs. What an amazing idea. So I'm going to show you guys some of the examples of how we're playing with that in our district. But make sure that you're making this document relevant. It is their learning plan, and you're having an annual meeting about it. Make it a special meeting. Of course, sometimes, all IEP meetings aren't going to be, rainbows and popsicles, but it is a good chance to work with that parent and that student to help them in their process through the K-12 education. So, requirements for the GIEP. So the 3 required documents that we need to have in our systems are the parent and student invitations signed, making sure that we are doing our due diligence to get that meeting done. And then the GIEP itself with PWN and signatures of all the attendees. Now, we know that we are all in virtual, in-person, real world, never the same type of meetings. But just check with your district, your gifted coordinator or your special education coordinator on how virtual attendees sign their documents. It's going to be different for each district. All right, so planning for the IEP. You want to make sure that you're planning them out yearly. For example, last year, we had a brand new case manager, and even though he had been reminded, he didn't get his IEPs done until April and May. A lot of them. And so the case manager that is taking over for that position, I made sure during our new teacher gifted training this year, I was like, spread these out. You don't want them all piled up at the end of the year. So really make sure that you are giving yourself an even caseload throughout the year. Of course, there will be some influxes, especially with testing and stuff like that, but you want to make sure that you are giving yourself some grace and giving yourself time to work on these IEPs. Scheduling. It is extremely important for you to get with the people at your school district or your school and figure out what is the best way to plan. You don't want to make enemies with regular ed teachers because you're pulling them out of their regular ed class all the time. So one of the ways I did this at the secondary level was that I would have a handout with all of the different planning periods of all of the teachers. And then I would call, make an appointment with the parent. If they wanted an 8 o'clock or they wanted a 10 o'clock, I would make sure that I found a teacher that the student had with that time, unless the parent asked for a particular teacher. That way, there was less coverage, there was less subs, there was less chaos with it. One thing that in our district that we were still to today are having struggles with is regular ed teachers checking their Google calendars. I think that the special ed and gifted teachers utilize those calendars a lot more than the regular ed. But that reminder from the principal where, you need to make sure that you're looking at your calendar and making sure you have meetings. I also use invitations, not only for the gifted student and parent, but I will show you an example of a reminder email that I send to the regular ed teachers the day before so that they realize, oh, I have a meeting tomorrow. And then if they are going to be out, they can let me know. So this is a basic IEP due date calendar. It's on that gifted resources page that Selena sent out earlier. This is very basic. There are a lot more difficult ones, but I basically go through, I usually don't have any in August, but I go from September to March and equally make sure that my caseload, if it's new to me, is spread out. And making sure that I know what the due dates are for those so they don't get out of compliance. This is also in our resource. This is an example of a invitation for a gifted educational meeting, straight out of Power School example. It has which notice it is, which student, what date, what time, location, all of that kind of stuff. And so models exactly what we have in PSSSP, Power School Special Programs, but was the gifted version we made. So this is an example of a email reminder that I would make for my regular education teachers. You're probably like, oh my gosh, how do you have the time to do that? All on Canva. I just said in Canva, I put reminder note or reminder, and it came up with this, and I just filled out the information with the gifted IEP information. I save it as a PNG, as a little picture. I drop it into the email, and guess what? This stands out a lot more than a black and white email that says, hey, we have a meeting tomorrow. They're going to kind of remember the happy face, and you can change them up to keep them interested. But this seems to have worked very well with my secondary and elementary teachers. So one of the major parts of the gifted IEP is to make sure that you are interviewing the student. There is nothing more embarrassing than sitting in an IEP meeting as an administrator or as a regular education teacher, and you realize that the gifted teacher doesn't even know the student. I know it's horrible, but it happens. The best practice for all of us, whether special education or gifted, is to do an interview with the student. That way you get to know them. You get to meet with them one-on-one. They know who you are. Because like in the secondary realm, they might not actually have you for class. You want to also let them know what they're gifted in. There are so many kids that are identified as gifted and they have no idea what they're gifted in because it happened in 3rd grade and they don't remember. Also, what classes they like and dislike and why. I mean, do they love English, but they hate the actual subject area that they're learning about right now? Is it a dislike of the way the teacher is presenting the information? All of that is very crucial when you're designing for their IEP and their specially designed instruction. You also want to see their hobbies and extracurriculars. Is this a kid that's a perfectionist that is overwhelmed with 4-H and band and every other extracurricular in the world. All of that is very important for social emotional learning. How do they feel about their gifted goals? Now, I've read in the last couple of years, I've read some SMART goals, mainly in the special education realm, but I've also seen them in gifted IEPs as well, where they're they basically tie the SMART goal to IXL diagnostic, or like getting like, a certain percentage on the diagnostic, or they get a certain grade in a class. That is not a measurable goal. I always try to get my students to help me design their goal in something that they're interested in. So for example, I've had kids that have wanted to write a book. And so their yearly goal was to produce 6 chapters for this book, bind it, and share it with their teacher and family. It might be working on a business plan for the business that they want to create after they are out of high school. Have something that's like real, a real life. They talk about real world learning, but something that they can actually create, and if they need to measure it, they can always discuss it rather than actually in a rubric format, rather than doing, percentages on the grade in a class. We'll go more into this when we're looking at the IEPs. And then finally, what are their future plans? And one of the things that I always tell my kids is, it's probably going to change 100 times before you get to where you want to be. And that's fine, but it kind of lets us track and see where they're at. In 3rd grade, they might want to be an astronaut. In 12th grade, they might want to be an electrical engineer. Obviously, similar pathways, but they've grown and changed over the years. And that's something that's wonderful to see. So that student interview is very important, and it allows the student to really show themselves and start that one-on-one relationship with you as well. So here I have 2 versions of the IEP questions. So what I have always done, it depended on what the IEP, which level I was doing, and what type. But with the new Gifted Technical Assistance Manual, I've actually gone through the IEP and made a questionnaire for those gifted students, so that we make sure that we touch on each point. So if 5 days later, I'm going and writing the IEP, I have all of their answers and I'm able to answer that correctly in the document. Now, I have a secondary version and I have an elementary version. Now, the elementary version, I am a secondary teacher at heart. And a lot of times I'm told that I have a very high vocabulary. So if you are an elementary teacher and feel like these questions are still too hard, make them your own, okay? But it will give you a nice guide of what you can use for your interviews for your gifted IEPs. All right. Do we have any questions or concerns about the gifted planning process? Getting all your stuff together for writing the IEP. So let's look at actually developing an IEP. So what makes an initial IEP different from an annual IEP? Can anyone tell me that in the chat? What is the difference between an initial and an annual? So the initial, well, the annual IEP is the IEP that you do yearly. The initial IEP is going to be your very first IEP. And so it's going to have a few extra components to it, which include that eligibility determination. So for example, when one of the students that has qualified, we will review the eligibility determination form with the parent in the IEP meeting. And then we will ask if they are wanting gifted education services. If they say yes, we continue with the IEP. If they say no, then they have the option of going back into the talent pool or just regular education. So you can present that information. During our third grade screener, we're going to be focused on using TAPAS, which is the Talent and Assessment Potential Talent and Potential Assessment System. And they will be, they actually have beautiful graphs that come out of those identifications that can go, that you can review with the parents on the scores and the composites for TAPAS. So it's basically that information sharing of how we got here, what are we doing, what can we do for your students. All right, so our first example that we're going to be using is Mr. Andre. So Andre is going to be a fourth grade student, very intelligent, very motivated. Parents are both doctors, and he is a global traveler. So he has a little bit different perspectives than maybe some of his other peers in class. He's gifted in specific aptitude and achievement in math and English. He's gifted in general intellectual ability and creative and divergent and problem solving and critical thinking. He is a very, very gifted individual. Even at fourth grade, he knows that he wants to be a lawyer when he grows up. I don't even think I knew what a lawyer was when I was in fourth grade. And he also is interested in things like speech and debate and chess club and some of those extracurricular activities. So let's look at what his gifted IEP, how we can construct this. Now, a reminder that this is the format of the Gifted Technical Assistance Manual in the Gifted TAM, and it is just in Google Doc form. Both of these are available, or any of the gifted IEPs are available on that resource sheet. You can individualize it for your school district, or you can use PowerSchool Special Programs version, which is almost identical to this as well. It's just not colorful and pretty. All right, so the student demographic data is the typical, you got student name, we have state ID, we have date of birth, parent information, and then the purpose of the IEP. So this is not an initial, this is an annual GIEP that we are having. So the qualification data, one of the pieces that I love about the new gifted IEP is that the PED actually helped us, giving us a little bit more guidance than that special education version. And so if you get confused, it has the directions on there. And has a lot of times has an example, which is very helpful, especially for people that are new to writing them. So based on the assessment and qualification information, the following IEP determination is made. So this is based on the eligibility determination page. Specific aptitude and achievement, general intellectual ability, divergent thinking, problem solving, and critical thinking. Now, if we had evidence that we could start collecting, or the student was showing extreme talents in, say, for instance, leadership, we could put leadership in the additional areas of giftedness and kind of monitor that for a couple years, develop a portfolio, and see if we can identify him with that later on. Same thing, if this kid didn't have a specific aptitude and achievement, then you could, if you wanted to see maybe they're doing excellent in mathematics, excuse me, it needs some acceleration that didn't show at the very beginning of his gifted journey. You could start investigating that and eventually adding that on as well. So that's a really nice kind of placeholder for us to document, hey, we're seeing this. This might be something we want to look into at a later date. All right, so probably the largest change on the gifted IEP is the present performance. Now, I know myself personally writing IEPs, I am still developing this, still developing the way I do it. And when I look at my old IEPs, I realize that I did some better than others. But remember, give yourself some grace. This is new. Now, I did go into special programs, especially for this page, to see if they gave the help features in special programs, and they did. It almost looks exactly like this. So all of these explanations of the areas are in there as well. So present performance is now divided into two areas. One is cognitive or general intellectual ability, nonverbal and verbal. So this is how they are cognitively doing, their intellectual ability, their cognitive styles, their aptitude and achievements, their thinking, their organization, their memory, all of that kind of stuff. Then the second portion is going to be their affective or social emotional. That's the major change here. And really looking at whether the student is self-aware, managing emotions, managing empathy, behavior regulation, self-esteem, because these are all parts of the asynchronicity of gifted students that can sometimes not be reported or sometimes kind of swept under the rug because they're doing so fabulously with their academics that they might not be growing as fast socially and emotionally. So I love that this part was added in there. First time I wrote it, it was a little weird, but we'll go over that. So this student is in 4th grade. So one of the exhibited behaviors in our school district, the way we're modeling it, is putting some of their test data, their current test data in. Because this is the way they're performing academically. Obviously, the student is on target at the high levels for IMISA and would eventually for his MSSA. iStation is also, he's in the 99th percentile in both reading and math. So that's a nice little check-in for the parents, depending on how often that the regular ed teacher shares this information. So then the manifest explanation, if we go back up to the directions, what can cause this behavior? Consider asynchrony and other factors. And so for this student, he's performing very well. And so we talked, because he's very interested in mathematics, even though he wants to become a lawyer. He's very talented in mathematics. And so I talk about how he's shown proficiency in early algebraic skills, even in 4th grade, consistently demonstrating strong understanding for mathematical concepts. In science and engineering, he excels actively engaging in hands-on experiences. That was all information from the gifted education teacher, from the gifted pullout. And then his performance in language arts, especially reading, is being showcased in his communication skills. Remember, this kid loves to speech and debate and talk in front of the class and present. Now, needs. When we look up at the directions, this might be in several areas. This might be something that needs to change over time. It might be being underdeveloped or developed to advanced or advanced to maintenance. But needs is not a bad thing. It is not a negative connotation. It's what the student needs. And actually, with my high school students last year, I would actually ask them if there was anything they needed. You'd be amazed at the answers. Some of them talk like they're teachers. There was one that said, I think it's in our next example, I need help with compacting the information or chunking the information when taking notes. Like it was that specific. So if you ask the kids what they want and what they need, they sometimes can really tell you exactly what they need. Don't put it past them. So the needs for Andre, he has potential for developing and seeking more differentiation and rigor across all of his subject areas. He also working on public speaking to build confidence and communicate effectively. And then also, I wanted him to explore different careers that will provide invaluable insights into various fields and help set future goals. Remember, he's only 4th grade and he already has his mind on lawyer. Well, what kind of lawyer do you want to be? And that proposes more conversation about that subject and everything. So those are some examples of how the cognitive, nonverbal, and verbal present levels we've been doing with our IEPs. Now for social emotional, this was a lot harder on me when I first started doing it. But then I realized you as a teacher, you as a person in that school, you're getting a lot of information from interactions with the student yourself, observing the student in hallways, lunch, recess, after school programs. You're also just seeing how they're acting in their class too. So even though I hadn't been specifically asked to do this before, after I started kind of figuring out what I needed to look at for those exhibited behaviors, like, you know, what is the teacher saying? Is the student unable to sit down? Is the parent saying that they're bored at school? All of these kinds of things can help and explain what are some of the things going on with the student. So for this particular student, he had social emotional strengths in leadership, elevated sense of humor, and empathetic with peers. And some areas that he needed to grow in was collaborating with his intellectual peers, controlling his overexcitabilities, and self-advocating for himself. And remember, this kid's in 4th grade, pretty advanced in self-advocation for that age, but he needed to start working on that a little bit more. So again, the manifest explanation is explaining those exhibited behaviors in a written form. So Andre has shown great leadership skills, often taking initiative in group activities, has a sense of humor that brightens the classroom, and he demonstrates empathy towards others. And for his needs, Andre will focus on collaborating more effectively with his intellectual peers, and also, even though he gets excited in situations, focus on getting focus and ability in those situations. So those are the 2 sections. Now we are going to be going over 2 other IEPs today, so you'll kind of see how these can be super individualized. So the summary of cognitive and affective strengths and needs for the student, this is basically you going through and saying, all right, summary of strengths. What is this kid doing? So for this one, English language arts and communication skills were areas of strength, accelerated mathematics ability potential, leadership skills, and empathy. Summary of needs, more rigorous content across all subject areas, public speaking opportunities, self-advocacy, and career exploration. Now, this is where they had a statement on goal progress from the previous GIEP. And so what I've been doing in the student interview is we go over the goal from the previous year, even if we've been visiting upon it for progress reports through the year. And then I asked the student, do you think you met this goal or not? And if we did, great, we'll met all the goals. If not, we can talk about how we can work it, and maybe we need to continue one of those goals for into this next school year and next IEP. So one of the reasons why they really updated the GIEP was there was a lot of differences going across the state. If you look at Power School special programs, there's several different versions of the gifted IEP. So when I came to this district, they were using one that was 5 pages long. It didn't even have accommodations. It didn't have a PWN. It didn't have any of that. And so with the new technical assistance manual, they wanted to make sure that we kind of had a hybrid that had the gifted pieces, but also the special education pieces that are needed in the state of New Mexico for that gifted IEP to be legal. So this is an example of one of those areas. You'll notice that this is very similar to any of the documents for secondary or elementary special education IEPs. So is the student twice exceptional? Do they come from a diverse background? Are they an English language learner? Do they have a 504 plan? Are there other factors to consider? If you answer yes to the first question, is the student twice exceptional? The majority of the time, you are going to defer to that special education case manager. So for instance, I had a senior a couple years ago that was twice exceptional, and I would work with their special education teacher to collaborate and make the gifted IEP annual goals and accommodations in their special education IEP. Now, what happens when you have a brand new student that maybe you found during gifted universal testing? I had 2 of those this last season of testing. We made sure that one of the school gifted team members for that school was particularly the speech therapist. And so we invited her to the meeting. Now, when we, after we have that EDT and we're going forward with the IEP, that gifted case manager is going to have to work with the special ed case manager to do that IEP together. So that won't be housed with the gifted IEPs. It will be housed with the special education IEPs because of the IDEA component. Discipline, very important to know. Does the student exhibit behaviors that impede the learning of ability of others or themselves? Most students that I work with, they have a school-wide discipline plan, but make sure if they even if it's not a bad behavior, maybe it's, maybe they have a tendency to sleep in the morning, maybe they're not getting enough sleep at night. Those are all kinds of behaviors that might need a goal or an instructional accommodation. So please remember, if you check yes to any exhibits impeding their learning, that you do need to have at least a goal or instructional accommodation in the IEP, or if it's severe behaviors, you need to talk to your school administrator about possibly looking at an FBA BIP. For participation in statewide and district-wide assessments, most of the time, gifted students are not going to need any accommodations, but occasionally they do. So we want to make sure we have those pieces. And now we are coming to our goal section. So, goals. They're always the dreaded goals. I love that we have a little bit more guidance on this. So in the gifted IEP, they ask for the students' annual goals to be based on their needs. Educational needs may be cognitive or affective. Examine behaviors, corresponding manifestations. This is all the information that we reviewed at the beginning. Goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based, i.e. SMART goals. They should inspire students. They should provide clear instructional and effective guidance. They should provide a measure, and they should provide an indicator of success or self-efficacy and next step. So for this student, He is extremely talented in mathematics, above and beyond all of his classmates. He actually is one of the reasons why I made a programming change in our district. And I'll go into that a little bit at the end of this IEP when we look at schedule of services. But Andre will be able to demonstrate the application of pre-algebra concepts such as order of operations and algebraic reasoning in real-world scenarios through project-based learning tasks across all subjects. So this goal is measurable. This goal is timely. This goal is relevant. It's attainable. And it can be done either in the regular education setting or in the gifted education setting, or maybe possibly both. So with the method of measurement, we have a project rubric with algebra concepts and a criteria of mastery of 90% or higher. Now, when I talk to the students and the parents about this, I talk about how, we're going to be working with him in different subject areas and looking at those operations and algebraic reasonings cross-curricularly to really kind of help inspire that student for these goals. One thing that I was not used to was the short-term learning outcomes, but I actually have started to love them, even though it's a little bit more work, because it's really nice when you give the regular education teacher some of this guidance. So to meet this goal, we need to work on problem solving and pre-algebra concepts, applying pre-algebra concepts to real world concepts, and extend mathematical learning through enrichment opportunities. So it has exactly what the objectives are for that learning outcome, and then some examples of how they can do it. Solving individual multi-step processes, enrichment activities, puzzles, all of that kind of stuff. I have not seen guidance on particular number of goals or what type of goals are needed. Back in 10 years ago, a lot of times you heard you had to have an academic and you had to have a functional. I think it really depends on the student. And so in our district, I have been encouraging my gifted teachers to have at least one academic goal. If they need a social emotional goal, make sure to put that in. But for each one of the students to have a career readiness goal, even if they are in fourth grade, just so that they can start exploring those ideas. And so for this one, he wanted to explore various career paths in private and corporate law and compare and contrast educational requirements and pay scales. A lot of times, and I've been adding the pay scales portion because it's amazing when kids don't understand the concept. They're like, oh, I'm going to go to school and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on college, and then I'm going to have a job that pays $40,000 a year. Probably need to look at different variations, but it gets them thinking about it. So the method of measurement I'm using for this is what's called a discussion-based assessment. This is super easy to do as a gifted teacher because you're talking and checking in with students. And so I would just have one of these in their folders and, hey, Andre, what have you learned about, have you looked anything up about the corporate lawyer? And then, they probably start talking about what they learned about it. And then maybe a couple months later, they talk some more about it. That way you can monitor and record your goals and looking at that with your students throughout the year, keeping track of them. For progress report goals and outcomes, in my school district, our special ed department has to send out progress reports to the parents every 4.5 weeks. There has not been a specific guidance provided by the New Mexico Technical Assistance Manual. And so as the coordinator for my district, I have put a BOI, MOI, EOI for their progress monitoring of their goals and outcomes in their gifted IEP. That way it's easy to communicate with the parent and make sure that they understand that we are tracking their progress. But I felt with a lot of the long-term annual gifted goals, they did not need as close of monitoring for 4.5 or every 9 weeks. The schedule of services. So I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but if you are new to gifted or special education, the schedule of services is what we're promising to the parents and the students that we're going to work with the kids. We don't go to their houses in the middle of the summer and give them gifted services. So we have to have 2 schedule of services, one for the current year and one for the next year. That bridges those 2 school years together with 0 services being given in the summer. And so this is an example of year 1. So this student is in 4th grade. Some of the accommodations I've written in here for the regular education teacher is provide advanced learning materials, allow option for independent projects rather than group projects. If you've never taught secondary gifted ed, there are so many kids that are gifted and talented that have been burned by group projects because the way that their teacher either grouped them or they get all of the low students with them and they ended up doing all the work because they wanted to make sure their grade was good. So that's one of my favorite accommodations, and sometimes teachers don't like me for that, but if a kid wants to do their project by themselves, they should be able to, unless it's super collaborative and the purpose is collaboration. And then offer opportunities for acceleration in subject areas. So for last school year, on all of my IEPs, I put at least 15 minutes a week for gifted case management. And I actually explain what it is for the parent and student. Monitoring grades, attendance, initiating discussions with the student, teacher, and parents if necessary. Remember, I was a secondary teacher, so I really rely on the students heavily and go to the parents when needed. In an elementary setting, there's more communication with the regular teacher usually. So that's blanket. All of my gifted kids get that, just to make sure that I have that in there, that I'm monitoring their grades. I'm giving myself some time for that gifted case management to justify for those gifted case management hours that are in my schedule. Then he's going to have a gifted pullout class, which is going to be 30 minutes on Tuesday and 30 minutes on Thursday. I don't remember exactly what the schedule was, but this allows for the student to be taken out of their mixability regular classroom and work with other gifted students and participate in enrichment and extension activities with their intellectual peers. This is very, very important for gifted students. A lot of times they feel like the oddball out because of their asynchronicity. And so it's important to have students be able to be in a supportive environment for that education, to take risks and start thinking critically and problem solving and answering questions that don't have an exact answer. And so that's one of the coolest things of elementary gifted pullout is to have that group of kids all together. So he doesn't have any supplementary. And so we're going into year 2. So this one is based on a real kid that I have in my district. He was a 4th grader at a very, very, very low performing school. He was the only kid that was advanced on any of the state assessments. And he was excelling, and a lot of the teachers did not know what to do with him in the areas of mathematics because they were just passing up everyone. So there was some conversation about what acceleration options there were in our district. And even though it was in our board policy, I don't think it had been done for decades. And so we are working on the regular acceleration policy for regular ed students, but we also had the opportunity to provide some acceleration with the gifted IEP as well. So I did some research, and we actually did a partnership with Arizona State University Prep Global Academy, which provides rigorous Cambridge curriculum classes for ages 6 through, or grades 6 through 12, that are middle school and high school level courses. They are all online digitally with a digital teacher, a real person that is a teacher. And they have excellent communication between the school and the parents, and the students for that matter. And so we decided in our remote area of the state that this might be a good option for students that were interested in different types of classes that usually wouldn't be available to them. I initially started looking into this because I felt like this student needed to accelerate, but I was not sure about the social and emotional part of the acceleration to send this tiny little kid that was in 4th grade to the middle school or the high school for these classes. Parents didn't really want it either. They knew that the kid needed some more focus on advanced mathematics, but wasn't up for taking them to the high school for these classes either. So I kind of found a nice median with that. What's nice about online digital schools, I know a lot of us are scarred from COVID, but if you are a younger student that is accelerating, you're just a person in a box, and sometimes just a name in the box, and no one has to actually know who you are or how old you are. And you're able to stay a little bit anonymous. So for this kid, we decided to do, we did a pre-test, and he actually tested out in Math 7. And so at the beginning of his 5th grade year, he is now currently taking 7th grade mathematics. And so this is what his schedule of services is going to be looking like for this school year. So he's in 5th grade. He has his gifted case management of 15 minutes a week. We changed the schedule at the school, so we have 2 60-minute periods. And actually, this school is doing something kind of cool for the gifted pullout classes. Excuse me. The gifted education teacher is actually working with the regular education teacher and is actually teaching the science and social studies portions in the enrichment setting. So that's kind of a cool concept that we're doing at that school. And then we added acceleration in curriculum compacting. Just like in a special education IEP, we can't put exactly what the program is, just in case we have to change it or we change what they're doing. So we decided to go with describing it as an acceleration in curriculum compacting. It's a digital online class on course that allows the student to compact and test out of known subjects and also accelerate at their own rate. So currently we have 52 students across the school district that are enrolled, gifted students that are enrolled in this program. I have a couple high school students that are actually taking 2 or 3 ASU prep classes and then 1 ASU college class. So we are representing this acceleration curriculum compacting in their IEPs. I went over this at the beginning of the year with the gifted specialist for the NM PED, Christopher Vion, to make sure we were doing this correctly. But if we are spending this time and this level on this type of curriculum and this type of learning and accommodations for these students, we need to qualify it. And so what's happening with some of my IEPs and caseloads is we are getting some level 2 and level 3 gifted students across the district, but only the ones that are doing this acceleration and curriculum compacting. But it is interesting, and some of them are succeeding astronomically. I have a couple high schoolers that decided to take English online. It's the end of the 9 weeks, and they are finished with their first semester of that English course. They're going to start their second semester at the beginning of the second 9 weeks. So they could technically possibly finish 2 English courses in 1 year. And it's all self-paced. So it's based on what they want to do. So level of service, you know, back in the day, we'd always put level 1, but now we're having to actually calculate the percentage. So this student was level 1 for last school year, but this school year, he will be level 2 with that acceleration and compacting class. District, we decided to go ahead and switch it to the gifted case management because one of the things that I'm fighting for in my district and have actually gotten surprisingly lots of ability with is with my principals. You know, in a lot of school districts, especially at the secondary level, they push back and they're like, well, they need to teach classes. And what we're doing with having this gifted case management put into the schedule of services is this is allowing for our argument that no, you know, our gifted teacher needs to have these, depending on their caseload, needs to have this so that they can work with their caseload. And of course, you know, I get the whining and crying about, oh, well, SPED doesn't do this. And I said, well, we're not SPED. And so I gave the principals kind of like a choice board. So they felt like there was some ownership of their schedule that they were creating. But I made sure and got support from my superiors when there was pushback against any case management periods. And we did have a couple principals that were like, no, special ed doesn't get it. But I said, no, this is different. And, you know, it's a different animal. So it's been interesting to kind of see that work. Eileen, I went in and edited this one to show the acceleration. So the minutes might have gotten a little messed up at 9 o'clock last night. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, I noticed that on your minutes.
Yeah, right there. So any other questions? I know it's a lot of information, but what I love about the TAM and Christopher Vion at the NM PED is he's very approachable. And if you have any questions about this kind of stuff, you can always reach out to me, but you can always reach out to him too. And we're building the plane while we're flying it. So there's a lot of things that we can kind of experiment with. And I know for so many years, you know, you were put in your place on exactly how you had to do it. Now we're creating something new. And sometimes it feels like you're breaking the rules. But we're trying to figure out the way it's working and what works best for our gifted students. Oh, after looking at the level of service, let's move on to the specially designed instruction. And this is definitely a new portion. One of the things that I did when I got to my school district was because there was no accommodations in that smaller gifted IEP, I actually developed a page sort of similar to this for my regular education teachers to give them. They had not had a gifted education teacher in their district for over 6 years. And so they really had not done much with gifted ed. And like the House Memorial 33 and the Senate Memorial 60, one of the findings when researching about gifted education before the changes of the TAM were made was that most regular education teachers have not ever received any gifted education education in their education program. And a lot of it has to be provided through professional development. Of course, now higher ed's trying to change that a little bit in the state of New Mexico, but there's still a lot of teachers that don't really know what to do with some of these students. And so I really like that in the IEP, it explains how to make this and how to, for their general education curriculum, to allow for content, learning processes, and performance. So different designed instruction can include content. This might be abstractions, complexities, varieties, study methods, or varieties of forms of subject acceleration. Might also be process, adding different types of higher order thinking or greater open-endedness in the curriculum. Freedom of choice, making sure that those students are getting a choice of what they're doing, how they're presenting, that sort of thing, so that they can be more creative and more flexible. And then product. It might be authentic problems. It might be the way that the students are consuming the information and the way they're demonstrating what they've learned. A lot of times regular education teachers think that this is going to be more work for them. That is one of the reasons I really, really love being a case manager, is working with those regular education teachers and making them realize that differentiation does not have to be hard, especially with gifted education. With gifted education, a lot of times the work and the onus is put onto the student, and they will go above and beyond what you were expecting. So for this student, we put alternative assignments, meaning allowing the student to ask for alternative assignments. So if, say for instance, if the fifth grade class was working on their script spelling bee, and they were working on their words, maybe if that student needed a little bit more higher level word, he could ask for that. And it would also allow for the teacher to understand that that might be something they want to go ahead and add in. Independent study, improving math skills to advanced levels, and also strengthen speaking and presentations. So these are good reminders of different ways that teachers can differentiate for their gifted ed students. I try to change it up each school year so that they're getting a little bit more each year and kind of experimenting with different things. You can also review this in the IEP from last year to this year and see what the teacher has done, what they're willing to do, and see if they have any ideas for other things that could be helpful. Then one of the big changes and pieces of the future planning and transition was the future planning part. I haven't actually discussed this with Mr. Vion, who wrote the gifted TAM. But after going through, I had to do one of those Education Act micro-credentials for level 2 to level 3 micro-credentials. And I'm thinking that this section was probably put in and made a little bit more meaty because of the Martinez-Yazzie case. Because we want to make sure that our students are prepared for the future, and that we as educators in New Mexico are preparing them for that. And so this needs to be student created. Of course, especially with elementary school students, you're not going to just have them write a SMART goal. You're going to help them go through the process, but make sure that they understand that there are different careers and different things that they can explore of their interests, and for that career in the future, that there are interests and courses of study that go along with it. And there's also activities and experiences they can do throughout their school life that can help them get to this process. I was not a gifted student in school, but I was a very high achieving student. One of the things that really kind of shaped the way my working life, my working passion, is I started out as a park ranger. As a teenager, I was a YCC, a youth conservation corps student, and then went into the park service when I turned 18 as a college student. And those kinds of things I would have never thought that I would have done. But if I was doing an IEP and working with myself back in my sophomore, junior year of high school, those are all things and all experiences that we could have written down and been part of that career exploration experience. Obviously, I did not become a full-time park ranger, but I did become a teacher, and park rangers, especially in the historical realm, are basically teachers for the public at large. So again, with the gifted IEP, they're giving us more information, some examples. And what I tell parents is that this is going to become more and more detailed as the student gets closer and closer to graduation. So this student, again, is 4th grade. He wants to become a lawyer. Areas of interest and course of study, public speaking, research, argumentative and persuasive writing. And then activities and experiences and strategies, I'm going to be suggesting speech and debate club and leadership opportunities in clubs and activities. Now, this next school year, he will have this portion, the gifted transition communication. And you basically just answer these 3 questions. What transition information needs to be communicated between schools? So if you're going from elementary to middle to high, and that depends on your school district. How will it be communicated? For example, in our school district, we invite the case manager of the next school. And then what specific transition planning needs to occur? Does the student need a little extra help? Maybe do they need a tour of the school? Do they need to kind of explore what options there are for classes? Maybe they would like to have a meeting with the counselor if they're going into high school. All of these things can be very important and can be put into that transition communication. And then, so this was the first year of this IEP for this student. So this next May, when he has his next one, we will actually go over what his career and future planning goals were, and whether they're the same or whether he's changed them completely or just changed them a little bit. But we'll do some sort of statement and narrative at the bottom on this student reflection portion. So the final piece of the IEP is the prior written notice of proposed actions. So this is required of special education and gifted education IEPs. So basically, this is the meeting notes of the meeting and the major proposals put in it. So for our district, we're making sure that the parents' rights pamphlet is offered. Sometimes they accept, sometimes they reject, just depends. The age of majority, letting the parents know at the age of 18. The student can decide who comes to the meetings. In our district, I encourage all gifted students, whether they're in 1st grade or whether they're a junior in high school, to attend their IEP meeting because they need to be part of that process. Now, for a little one, like a 1st or 2nd grader, you might just have them come in for their goals and then have them go back to class for the other portions of the IEP. But being part of that team and being part of that process of being part of their education planning is very important, even at a young age. Then we propose the accommodations and modifications that are in the specially designed instruction and the schedule of services portion. The service level, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, depending on what the student is doing. And then any other proposed actions. This would be if any regular education teacher, the LEA, the parent, the student brings up any type of proposals, and this can be recorded formally. So then after all of that is explained and we go over the IEP, then all of the members of the IEP team will sign the document, and the document will be finalized for the next school year, or for the for the next period that they have this document. So this is an example of the elementary GIEP. And so we're going to continue diving deeper into a little bit older kids IEP. Our next one is going to be Sally sample, which I'm sure you guys have had in your school districts. So like my other one, this is based on a real student. But this is a high school student, 8th or 11th grade, very intelligent, very motivated, very skilled in the musical arts. Her giftedness is in intellectual ability, aptitude and achievement, creative and divergent thinking, and problem solving and critical thinking. She's very much an overachieving gifted student. She's been part of our Purdue partnership. We have a partnership with Purdue University where 20 of our students get to attend their Jerry 2 camp, which is a 2-week gifted camp at Purdue University. And she also has college and post-secondary pursuits of UCLA, Yale, and Princeton. So she is very much a high flyer and wants to make sure that she uses her abilities for her education in the future. She's very, very mindset on her abilities as a student and wants to progress and grow. So let's dive into her IEP. All right, so typical information, their demographic data, again, the qualification data. So for present performance, you see, when we went over this earlier, there are lots of different options. I have not yet put everything for exhibited behaviors because you don't always have all that information. And so the exhibited behaviors box, I've been doing more of a snapshot and then using the manifest explanation and the needs as more of the narrative portion of the document. So for her exhibited behaviors, for her cognitive abilities, she is performing exceptionally in all of her classes. Unfortunately, our data and testing data has been having some issues in Power School and Performance Matters. And so we haven't had access as easily to our testing numbers. So I wasn't able to pull her PSAT or SAT scores for her IEP, but this student actually knew what they were on the top of her head from taking them. But so for this student, she's really growing and she's really starting to figure out kind of what she wants to do. So she's very organized and creative. She keeps up with her academic courses with very high grades. She is very involved in the music department. Actually, this summer after this IEP was written, we do not have a band teacher anymore. So she and one of the other senior band students actually ran the band camp and have been basically running the class for their band peers, which is very cool and very leadership oriented. She has favorite courses. She has extracurricular activities, but she would also like to pursue some things like swimming and some health sort of things in the future. This was one of the students, when I asked them what they needed, she was able to identify that she needed assistance with comprehension, quote unquote. Feels like sometimes explanations need to be chunked or broken down more. And that came straight from her mouth. So some of these students really know what they need and what they need help with, which is really a great place to be where you can help them with that. Socially and emotionally, she's very, very She's highly progressed throughout her high school years. She's very positive. She's empathetic, has good self-esteem, good at making it friends and keeping friend groups. Again, this actually wasn't a student that I had in a technical class. She was just one of my gifted case management students, but I was able to pull that information from her regular education teachers, but also observations of her throughout the school day, in friend groups and being around her and her checking in and all that kind of stuff. So remember, it might not be like super hard evidence, but anecdotal evidence of this kind of stuff is important as well. Then there's a summary, just kind of review those. Her consideration of special factors, discipline, no discipline issue, just no statewide or district-wide accommodations needed. And her goals, you're going to see, are going to be a lot more detailed than that fourth graders. Oh, okay. So Jana has a great question. She said, I noticed for present levels on both examples, you haven't included any evaluation data like COGAT, SIGS, and HOPE scale. Is there a reason for this? So that is a great question. So on the eligibility determination document, that is where all of that information is stored. And if I had an example of an initial IEP, meaning the very first IEP, I would include the COGAT, SIGS, and HOPE and all of that information that was provided in the portfolio evidence for the gifted identification. Since these are students that were already established as gifted identified, I'm not going back and putting that information in. Most of the time, a kid only takes a COGAT once, and a SIGS and HOPE is only done once. So I only put that in the first document needed. Now, when I came in as a case manager and I was meeting these students first and foremost, and they'd been tested 10 years ago, I did make sure to go back and look at their original testing to make sure that the identification piece was correct. Because if you've been around gifted education for long enough, you usually figure out it's kind of like telephone. Their areas of giftedness sometimes change on the IEP depending on the case manager. So Jana, does that answer your question about the COGAT, SIGS, and HOPE scale? So definitely put it on the initial IEP, but you don't have to reference back to it. Unless, like for instance, like in our district, if a kid had a real interest in maybe pursuing his giftedness in science, we could do a specific science-driven test, and we could put those types of scores in there as well. All right, so like I was saying, with the high school IEPs, it's going to become a lot more specific most of the time. Now, sometimes high school students, like our last example I'm going to give, doesn't know, they didn't know what they wanted to do. They were still at that, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. But then there's other high school students that they're very specific in what they want to do, and they know what they want to do. So one of the career goals for this student was this was not the one I was thinking it was, but we can go over it. So this one is based on oh, I think we changed this during my training. We wrote one together. So just imagine the student had more artistic ability and creative ability in rather than music ability that we went over earlier. So we were trying to find a way for this student to promote their artistic ability. And so for this one, Sally will create a series of art projects using different mediums, so different types of art materials, completing at least 3 projects per semester reflecting her interest. So what this does is it gives a little bit more of an open artistic ability for this student. If they were interested in going into some type of artist field, musical field, if we were doing this, rewriting this one, it could be a series of musical pieces if they were interested in composing music. This can be really open. Make sure though, because I've seen it on a couple and they were great goals, but they actually put specifically Science Olympiad or English Expo or Science Fair. Make sure if you are tying your goal to a competition that you're vague, that you're talking about a science project. That way, in case a snowstorm comes in and you can't go to the science fair district competition, or there's a cancellation of a competition down in Albuquerque, that it doesn't affect your IEP. You don't want to be that specific. Actually for this student, before I had changed this in one of my other trainings, one of the things that we were looking for this student was she was very interested in looking at arcade or building a business for herself, and opening like a cafe arcade. That was like what she wanted to do. And which surprised me because for this student, she has so many different abilities, and going into business, I didn't think was going to be one of them, but it was like her passion that she wanted to do. And so some of the things that we, for example, the goal for that was she would create a business plan for a cafe arcade with profit projections and making sure that kind of like the business plan for the business. And so for the short-term learning goals, we developed financial literacy skills and wanted to enhance leadership communication skills while working on those pieces, because those weren't typically in kind of her plan of action, but they were definitely things that she was going to need for the future. So say, for instance, Sally was having a hard time initiating self-advocacy, having a hard time talking to her regular ed teachers. We have that a lot with our gifted students. And so I find myself doing the self-advocation goal very often, but it is going to be different for each student. This student is pretty well versed in talking with teachers, but definitely needed a little bit more interaction based on her question on comprehension. She would just let the teacher keep on going without asking for more clarification. So for her goal for this, she had Sally will independently initiate conversations with teachers and professors, because she was in dual credit class, in 9 out of 10 interactions, demonstrating effective self-advocacy skills as measured by classroom observations and teacher feedback. So the observations and feedback can actually be collected through classroom observations, but also email communication with teachers. A lot of times that's we don't give students enough practice in that, especially with a lot of our college professors being that the main form of communication for questions and concerns. You know, a lot of times we're like, just write them an email, and that's a little scary for a high school student to email to their college professor. So sometimes they might need some guidance, they might need some exemplars, that sort of thing. Short-term learning outcomes that go with that one: developing collaborative skills and written communication forms with precise and concise language. So for this student, we had gifted case management. She was pretty self-sufficient as a gifted 11th grader. I worked with her about 30 minutes a week on case management. It was more than that 15 minutes because a lot of times she would stop in, or I would stop in with her and her in the band room to see what she needed, how she was doing. She'd tell me about her day or week or month, and so there was a little bit more interaction than with some of the gifted case management. So for her accommodations, we wanted to make sure that she was being put into intellectual areas that had information and flexible grouping for her giftedness. Again, by the end of high school, a lot of gifted students are burned out on group projects because they've kind of been burned over the years. So definitely be understanding of that. So for her senior year, I wanted to put a little bit of extra time monthly in for her college and career readiness transition. She wanted extra assistance from myself and the college and career readiness counselor who's in charge of all 200 seniors to help with some of the parts of applications. So helping her fill out those applications, make a plan for when things are due, sitting down and helping with applications if needed, giving her information about FAFSA and any type of scholarships and that sort of thing. I know I'm going to be spending more time with her this senior year for that, so I'm putting that in her schedule of services. Still leaves her at level 1. And for her teachers, the specifically designed instruction portion is still working on those ideas of independent study, flexible pacing, access to high quality and advanced texts, and challenging and stimulating environments. Making sure that the regular ed teacher realizes, if they've already mastered the concept, they need to go ahead and move on. They don't need to be part of the reteaching, and they need to have that ability for extension. So for future planning and transition, with this being a high school student, I did more of a quote of what she said. She wanted to maintain her A's in her honors and dual credit, but she also was interested in becoming a business owner of a cafe and arcade. So areas of interest, music and business, activities, music courses. Remember at the beginning, she wanted to practice swimming. She also wanted to seek out theater opportunities outside of school. One thing in my district that it's on the back burner right now because we're just trying to roll out this entire new gifted education is very important. But one of the things that I'm going to be looking for in future years is starting a mentorship program for some of our gifted students so that they have mentors in professional areas, so that they could, possibly partner up with a business leader in the community and learn what are some of the things that I need to know about before I jump 2 feet into this for exploration in the future. She was a junior. She's going to be going into her senior year. So for her gifted transition communication, I made sure that we put that she was preparing for her college or post-secondary training with her high school counselor, her gifted teacher, and her college and career readiness counselor, and that Sally will communicate with those about her findings on career research and investigation and things that she wants to do in the future. Prior written notice and signatures. So that is an example of a high-performing gifted student at the high school level. Doesn't have many troubles with social and emotional, doesn't have many problems with grades or interactions with teachers. This is, in my experience, 90% of my gifted students at the high school level. So what I'm going to show you guys next is that 10%. where they're struggling, and they're struggling a lot. So I'm going to finish up today's presentation with going over our example student, Johnny Little. Johnny is, like I was saying, a student that is struggling a little bit more in school, and is maybe a little bit more of that underachieving gifted student that is at the high school level. So he is in 11th grade. He's very intelligent, but bored. He easily is distracted by himself and others. He's incredibly gifted in spatial analytics, spatial artistic, mathematics, and even written linguistic. Has major attendance issues, has some aspirations for automotive or something with his hands, and would like to attend a technical school. It's a little bit different student than what we were just talking about. All right, so let's dive into little Johnny's or Johnny Little's IEP for today. All right. So I'm going to jump around this one a little bit because we've seen it a couple times at this point. So for his cognitive areas, I made sure to make a detailed analysis of what was going on with his grades. He had been performing okay, sort of, for semester one, but then fell off the deep end after first semester. And you can see as of February of his second semester, he was failing everything, including his gifted classes and any of the courses that he was in. So even though Johnny demonstrated exceptional critical thinking skills by analyzing problems and proposing creative solutions, his mechanical mind shined through with the ability to excel in a hands-on activity, showing natural talent for understanding on how things work. Now, is this student performing at level? In terms of grades, no. In terms of giftedness, he is still exhibiting his areas of giftedness. They are just not shining through to that academic achievement. So the most important part was the needs portion of this. So even though this student is usually very distracted, very bored, doesn't care a lot about school, in the one-on-one interview with him, he actually was able to identify that motivation and procrastination were areas that he needed the most improvement on. That wasn't something that I suggested to him. It was something that he actually brought up himself, which I thought was very introspective. We needed to address the low academic performance and make sure that he was starting to make significant improvements. One of the conversations I had with him, do you want to graduate from high school? Because he was kind of on that path of really slipping grades. And he had reassured and really wanted to make sure he did want to finish high school. He did want to finish high school in his regular high school, not the alternative high school, and that he was going to make these improvements. Now, socially and emotionally, obviously there's some things that aren't aligning up here. He's having trouble with motivation. He's having trouble with completing tasks. He's having trouble with absenteeism and tardiness. And it's showing in his classes, but it's also showing in his social and emotional life too. These behaviors are hindering their academic progress and overall success in school. And the needs is he needs more participation in appropriate activities for the school and become more engaged in the curriculum. And so you'll see later in the IEP document where he has more information about that. So for his goals, one of the things that he was extremely hesitant about was what he wanted to do in the future. And so after a lot of kind of digging in the interview on my part, it finally came out. And that's what's strange about some students. Like they have expectation, or they think their parents expect something from them and it's not what they want to do, and they're like nervous to talk about it. But Johnny, he didn't know exactly what he wanted to do, but he knew he didn't want to go to a regular 4-year college. He has interests in automotive repairs and kind of the machinery behind things works. And so one of the goals that I gave him for this year was compiling a list of 3 post-secondary trade schools that offer a mechanical or automotive program that wanted to align with his career goals. That way he could start looking at the future and looking at that end game. Academically, obviously, overall grade level was not doing well. And if he had continued on that course, he was going to be in real deep doo-doo by summer school time. And so he, for his academic goal, he agreed that he wanted to improve his grades with at least 2-letter grades in each thing. Now that would have been a C average. I believe that he was able to pull out more of a BC average. But by going and participating in his subject areas, increasing participation in the general curriculum, and actively engaging with the teacher. So we were looking at a 79% or higher of the coursework grades because he really needed to just level it up with those teachers. Short-term learning outcomes, since he was having such difficulty with this, increasing grades, enhancing motivation, improving advocacy skills, and all of that kind of stuff. So for this student, for his areas for his schedule of services, I actually put extra time in for coaching him on self-advocacy, organization, and task management practice. This way I was able to have time with him, sit down. Hey, how is your grades in these classes going? What do we need to do to get you caught up? What do we need to do about talking with your teachers about making up some of these assignments? All that stuff takes time, especially when you're pulling a kid if they're not in your actual classroom. And so I wanted to make sure that we were representing that. And then again, the gifted case management for just the typical gifted stuff. For his senior year, just like with the other student, I did a little less time per week because of the self-advocacy. We could actually put those 2 together. But I added the self-advocacy, the career and college readiness, and the gifted case management. One of the things that this student had was boredom. And so some of the things that I use as a gifted education teacher is to really liven up assignments and liven up ability through independent research and choice boards. When the students can own what they're learning about, they have a lot more buy-in. And think about how many worksheets and handouts and all kinds of stuff like that they get over their educational life, and they get tired. So for this student, future planning was really important because he really was trying to figure out. So we likened it to his career readiness goal, pursuing mechanical and automotive field, making sure that things are hands-on, real-world problem solving and integration of mechanical concepts, and working towards a post-secondary program. So this is an example of a student that may not be doing very well, but you can make a very robust and good plan for these students. So now that we're wrapping up today's presentation, I do want to encourage all of you, if you have not looked into the Gifted Technical Assistance Manual, please do so. It will help you a lot in the guidance of kind of what's going on in New Mexico gifted education.